Hello and welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. As you settle in for the night, prepare to be immersed in a world of eerie whispers and unsettling tales, designed to both chill and soothe. Now close your eyes, relax, and let the darkness carry you away. And if these nightly tales captivate you, feel free to join our community for more whispered secrets. The first time Eleanor met Nathan, he felt like a dream. Charming, attentive, and impossibly charismatic, he swept into her life with the ease of a seasoned lover. He listened to her, really listened, in a way no one else had before. He remembered the little details, the name of her childhood pet, the way she liked her coffee, the book she had read a dozen times. It started like every great love story. They met at a charity gala, an event Eleanor had attended reluctantly. She wasn't one for extravagant affairs, but her best friend Riley had convinced her to go, insisting that she needed to get out there. She had just turned 30 and had spent the last few years burying herself in work, trying to ignore the persistent loneliness creeping into her life. Dressed in an elegant navy gown, she had been nursing a glass of champagne when she first noticed Nathan. He had that kind of presence that drew attention without effort. His suit was tailored perfectly to his frame, his dark hair neatly styled, his eyes sharp and knowing. He approached her with a confident ease, offering a smile that made her stomach flip. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," he said smoothly, tilting his glass toward hers. She chuckled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to those who know how to read people," he replied. "And I happen to be an expert." From that moment on, the night became a blur of conversation, laughter, and an undeniable connection. He was magnetic, drawing her in with stories of his travels, his business ventures, his deep appreciation for literature, something they shared. They had spent hours talking about Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and the power of words to transport someone to another world. When the night ended, he walked her to her car, his hand lightly resting on her lower back. "I'd love to see you again, Eleanor," he said softly, his voice laced with sincerity. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'd like that." Their first date was something out of a fairy tale. He took her to a rooftop restaurant, where the city lights shimmered like scattered diamonds below them. The food was exquisite, the wine rich and smooth. He was the perfect gentleman, attentive and charming, making her feel like the most important person in the world. As the evening progressed, she found herself letting her guard down in a way she hadn't in years. He was easy to talk to, a man who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. She told him about her love for painting, how she had stopped years ago because life got in the way. She told him about her childhood, about the little bookshop her grandmother had owned, about the quiet weekends she spent lost in the pages of a novel. "I'd love to see your paintings someday," Nathan said, his fingers lightly brushing over the back of her hand. "I bet they're incredible." She laughed softly. "I doubt that. I haven't picked up a brush in years." "Then maybe it's time you did." There was something about the way he said it, so encouraging, so sure, that made her believe, for the first time in a long time, that maybe she could. Nathan made her feel seen. He showered her with affection, small thoughtful gifts, and constant attention. If she mentioned liking a particular type of flower, she would find a bouquet waiting at her doorstep. If she had a long day at work, he would surprise her with takeout from her favorite restaurant. She had never been loved like this before. And so, when he told her he had never felt this way about anyone, she believed him. When he whispered that she was special, that she was different, she let herself fall. She had no idea that love could be a carefully crafted illusion. Looking back, she would realize that the signs had been there from the beginning. The way he subtly tested her, seeing how much of herself she was willing to give. The way he watched her reactions closely, learning what made her happy, what made her insecure. But in those early days, all she saw was the magic, the kind of romance she had only read about in books. She had no idea that the very things that made her feel cherished would one day become the chains that held her captive. The illusion of perfection never shatters all at once. It cracks slowly, subtly, until one day, you realize you are standing in the ruins of something you once believed was beautiful. At first, Eleanor dismissed the small moments of discomfort. Love required compromise, didn't it? Nobody was perfect. If she expected to be with someone as wonderful as Nathan, she had to make small adjustments. That was normal. But the adjustments began stacking up, one by one, until she was no longer sure where she ended and where Nathan's expectations of her began. The first time it happened, it was so casual that Eleanor barely registered it as a red flag. They were getting ready to go out to dinner, and she had picked out a burgundy dress that hugged her figure just right. She had always loved this dress. It made her feel confident, powerful, like the version of herself she used to be before life dulled her edges. Nathan, standing behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her neck. At first, it seemed affectionate, but then his hands gripped the fabric of her dress lightly. "You're really wearing this tonight?" he murmured against her skin. Eleanor frowned, looking at their reflection in the mirror. "What's wrong with it?" He hesitated, just for a second, before smiling. "Nothing, babe. You look stunning. I just think maybe something a little more elegant would suit you better. You know, something less flashy." It was such a small thing. Just a suggestion. So why did her stomach twist? She changed the dress. It wasn't long before Nathan started making more suggestions. "I love your hair up," he would say when she wore it down. "You should try wearing it in a bun more often. It shows off your cheekbones. That lipstick is a little much, don't you think? You're naturally beautiful. You don't need all that. I don't think Riley really has your best interests at heart. She's so opinionated. Have you noticed how she always talks over you?" Little by little, Eleanor found herself changing. Not in any drastic, dramatic way, but in small, almost imperceptible shifts. She stopped wearing the lipstick she had always loved. She wore her hair up more often. She started seeing Riley less, convincing herself that Nathan was right, that maybe Riley wasn't the best influence. And Nathan was always so good to her. He still brought her flowers, still left sweet notes on her bedside table. He made her feel cherished, adored. So what if he had a few opinions? Didn't that just mean he cared? That's what she told herself. The first fight caught her off guard. It wasn't over anything significant. It never is in the beginning. They had been watching a movie together, something she had chosen, when Nathan sighed and turned to her. "Do you actually enjoy this?" he asked. She looked at him, startled. "Yeah, I do." "Why?" He shrugged. "It's just kind of a waste of time, don't you think? I mean, you could be watching something that actually stimulates your mind. I just don't get why you'd choose this." It was a simple comment, but it made something in her tighten. "I like it," she said again, firmer this time. Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. Okay, don't get defensive. I just think you're better than this kind of thing." For the rest of the night, she felt like she had to prove she was better. She started picking movies she thought he would like instead. The next time they watched something, she caught herself looking at him for approval, waiting to see if she had made the right choice. She didn't recognize herself. Slowly, things became more unsteady. One moment, Nathan was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who whispered sweet nothings into her ear, who ran his fingers through her hair as she fell asleep. And the next, he was someone else entirely, someone whose approval she had to earn. One night, they were at a dinner party with a few of Nathan's colleagues. Eleanor had made a joke about something insignificant, something she had thought was light-hearted and harmless. But when she glanced at Nathan, she noticed his jaw was tight, his smile just a little too forced. When they got home, he was silent. At first, she thought he was just tired, but when she reached for his hand, he pulled away. "Did you have to embarrass me tonight?" he asked, his tone cold. Eleanor's breath caught. "What?" "That joke. About me not being able to cook. It made me look stupid in front of my colleagues. Do you even think before you speak?" She felt her heart sink. "I didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke." Nathan scoffed. "Yeah, well, maybe next time think twice. You make me feel like I can't trust you to have my back." She apologized. She wasn't even sure why, but she did. And then she spent the next day replaying the moment in her head, analyzing every word she had said, wondering how she could have prevented the fight. The truth was she had done nothing wrong, but she was already starting to believe that she had. That was how it started. The subtle, almost invisible manipulation. The tiny remarks, the light corrections, the carefully placed criticisms. By the time Eleanor realized what was happening, she had already given away pieces of herself. And Nathan, he was just getting started. It was slow, methodical. The way Nathan began to chip away at Eleanor's world until he was the only thing left in it. She didn't see it at first. Nobody ever does. Love had a way of blinding her, making her believe that what she was experiencing was normal, even expected. Relationships required compromise, right? She told herself that often, ignoring the voice inside her that whispered something was wrong. The first friendships to fade were the ones he didn't like. He never said she couldn't see them, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt, quiet suggestions that made her question things she had never questioned before. Have you noticed how much Riley interrupts you when you talk? Nathan asked one evening as they sat curled up on the couch. It's like she doesn't even respect you. Eleanor frowned. Riley doesn't do that. She's just passionate when she talks. Nathan shrugged. I don't know. I just feel like she doesn't appreciate you the way I do. But maybe I'm wrong. And just like that, the thought was there. A whisper of doubt that hadn't existed before. The next time she saw Riley, she noticed the interruptions. She noticed how Riley spoke over her sometimes, how she didn't always ask about Eleanor's day. Had Riley always been this way? Had she just never realized it before? Slowly, she started making excuses not to see her. I'm too tired tonight. Nathan and I already have plans. Work has been crazy. Riley tried for a while, texting, calling, reaching out, but eventually the distance grew too wide. Nathan was pleased. He never said it outright, but Eleanor could see it in the way he held her just a little tighter at night, in the way he murmured, I'm all you need, aren't I? And the scariest part was that, for a while, she believed him. Her family was next. Eleanor had always been close to her mother, calling her every Sunday without fail. It was a ritual, something that grounded her. But after a few months with Nathan, the calls became less frequent. Your mom is great, but she's kind of overbearing, don't you think? Nathan asked one day after overhearing one of their conversations. She asks so many questions. It's like she doesn't trust you to live your own life. Eleanor had laughed, brushing it off. That's just how she is. She worries. But doesn't it get exhausting? Always having to justify your choices to her. Eleanor had never thought about it that way before. Her mother did ask a lot of questions. Where she was going, what she was doing, if Nathan treated her well. She told herself it was normal for a parent to worry, but the next time her mother called, she hesitated before picking up. And when she did answer, she kept the conversation short. You haven't called in a while, her mother said, concern in her voice. Is everything okay? Yeah, of course, Eleanor replied. Just busy. Work has been crazy. And Nathan? How's he? He's great. A pause. Look, Mom, I really have to go. Her mother sighed. Eleanor, if something was wrong, you'd tell me, wouldn't you? A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. Nothing's wrong, Mom. I promise. It was the first lie she ever told her. Soon, her world had shrunk to just Nathan. She didn't even realize it was happening until one day. She looked at her phone and saw no missed messages. No invitations. No check-ins from friends. She had let them all go. Or maybe they had let her go after realizing she wasn't the same person anymore. She felt a pang of loneliness, but Nathan was there to fill the void. I love you so much, Eleanor, he whispered one night as they lay in bed. I don't need anyone else. As long as I have you, I'm happy. She exhaled, trying to push down the emptiness curling in her chest. I love you too. And for a while, she convinced herself that was enough. Eleanor didn't wake up one morning and realize she had lost herself. It happened gradually, a slow erosion of her independence, piece by piece, until she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. Nathan's control was never forceful. It was quiet, insidious, disguised as love and concern. He didn't need to demand anything from her. He made her want to change for him. It began with the way she dressed. I love you in dark colors, he had told her early on in their relationship, running his fingers through her hair as she stood in front of her closet. Red is a little too much, don't you think? You're naturally beautiful. You don't need to draw so much attention to yourself. Eleanor had hesitated. She had always loved the way red made her feel, confident, bold, unafraid. But Nathan preferred something else, and if wearing navy or black made him happy, then what was the harm? So she changed. She stopped wearing bright colors. Her wardrobe became muted, safe. She convinced herself that she was simply refining her style. But in reality, she was shrinking. Then came her makeup. Nathan had always said she was beautiful, but after a while, his compliments turned into suggestions. I don't get why you wear so much mascara. I love your face without all that stuff covering it up. That lipstick is a little bold for work, don't you think? You don't need to impress anyone but me. The first time he made a comment, she had laughed it off. But then, slowly, she began leaving her makeup bag untouched. She swapped her bold lipsticks for subtle gloss, then for nothing at all. Her makeup-free face became her normal reflection. She told herself she was just simplifying her routine, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Nathan also had strong opinions about her social life. "You're always talking to Riley," he remarked one evening as they sat on the couch. "I feel like she doesn't really respect our relationship. She's always trying to keep you away from me." Eleanor frowned. "She's just protective. She wants me to be happy." Nathan sighed, shaking his head. "And she thinks I don't make you happy? It's just, I feel like she's planting ideas in your head. It's like she wants you to doubt me." That sentence haunted her. Was Riley making her doubt Nathan? She had never questioned her friend before, but now the seed had been planted. The next time Riley expressed concern, Eleanor found herself growing defensive. "You don't know him like I do," she had snapped. "Nathan loves me. He just wants what's best for me." Riley had looked at her with something between pity and frustration. "I just don't want to see you disappear, Elle." Eleanor had scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I'm not disappearing." But she was. The changes weren't just in her friendships. Nathan began making subtle comments about her job, too. "You're always so stressed," he murmured one night as she worked late into the evening. "I hate seeing you like this. If you didn't have to work so much, we could spend more time together." She had waved him off at first, but soon the idea took root. "I could cut back my hours," she suggested one evening. Nathan's face lit up. "I think that's a great idea. You don't need to push yourself so hard. I can take care of us." So she did. She started saying no to new projects. She turned down promotions. She told herself she was prioritizing her happiness, but in reality, she was prioritizing Nathan's comfort. She didn't notice it then, but he had slowly become the center of her world. Every decision she made revolved around him, his opinions, his desires, his moods. And worst of all, she thought that was love. The first time Eleanor caught a glimpse of what was happening, she was in a cafe alone, waiting for Nathan to pick her up. She had been sitting by the window, watching people walk by, when she saw a woman laughing loudly with a group of friends. She was vibrant, unapologetic in her joy. Something in Eleanor ached as she realized she couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Had she really given up so much of herself just to make Nathan happy? Before she could dwell on the thought, her phone buzzed. "Nathan, I'm outside. Hurry up." And just like that, the moment passed. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, pushing down the growing unease that threatened to surface. She wasn't disappearing. She was just becoming the version of herself that Nathan loved. Wasn't she? Eleanor had always trusted her own mind. She prided herself on her ability to remember details, to analyze situations logically. But with Nathan, that certainty began to slip away. It happened so gradually that she didn't even notice at first. Small corrections, innocent-sounding remarks, each one planting a seed of doubt in her mind until she was no longer sure of her own reality. "I never said that," Nathan told her one evening, shaking his head with a soft chuckle. Eleanor frowned. "Yes, you did. You said you didn't want me to go to the office party because you thought my co-workers were fake." Nathan's expression was patient, almost amused. "Babe, I never said that. I just mentioned that you always complain about them, and I thought maybe you wouldn't enjoy yourself. But if you want to go, go ahead. I just don't understand why you're twisting my words." Eleanor hesitated. Had she misunderstood? No, she was sure she had heard him say it. But now, looking at him, so calm and rational while she felt frustrated and confused, doubt crept in. "Maybe I just misremembered," she murmured, feeling a flush of embarrassment. Nathan smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You do that sometimes, love. But it's okay. That's what I'm here for." That was the first time. It wouldn't be the last. It started happening more frequently after that. "You're imagining things, Eleanor. I never told you not to wear that dress. I just said I thought the blue one looked better. You're always overreacting. I don't know why you're upset. I never ignored you at dinner. I was just talking to Mark. You get so jealous over nothing. I swear, you told me you wanted to stay in tonight. Now you're saying I pressured you? That's ridiculous." Each time, Eleanor felt the same growing sense of confusion. These weren't big fights. There was no screaming, no dramatic accusations. Just little moments where her perception of reality was gently nudged into question, until she wasn't sure what was true anymore. The worst part was that Nathan never seemed angry. He was always patient, always reasonable. If she was upset, it was because she was overthinking. If she remembered something differently, it was because her mind was playing tricks on her. If she felt hurt, it was because she was too sensitive. Why are you always looking for problems? Nathan sighed one evening when she brought up something he had said earlier. It's like you want to fight with me. I don't, she whispered, staring at her hands. I feel like I can't tell what's real anymore. Nathan's expression softened. He reached out, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. That's because you overthink everything, babe. But that's why you have me. I help you see things clearly. You don't need to stress so much. Just trust me. She nodded, forcing a smile, but deep inside, something felt wrong. The worst instance happened after a dinner party at Nathan's friend's house. It had been a rare night of fun. Eleanor had let herself relax, had laughed freely, had even engaged in playful teasing with one of Nathan's co-workers. It had been innocent, nothing more than light-hearted banter. But as soon as they got home, she could tell something was off. Nathan barely looked at her as he took off his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. "Did you have fun tonight?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Eleanor hesitated. "Yeah, it was nice." Nathan exhaled through his nose. "Nice. Right. Is that why you were all over Jason?" Her stomach dropped. "What? I wasn't." "You were laughing at everything he said, touching his arm." "I was standing right there, Eleanor. You think I didn't notice?" She felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. "I wasn't flirting. I was just being friendly." Nathan scoffed, shaking his head. "You always do this. You act like I'm crazy, like I'm making things up. But I saw you, and so did everyone else. You embarrassed me." Tears burned in her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I swear I wasn't." "Just drop it," he muttered, turning away. "I don't want to fight." Eleanor stood frozen in place, guilt and confusion warring inside her. Had she really been too friendly? Had she disrespected him without realizing it? The next time they went out, she barely spoke to anyone. She kept her hands clasped in her lap, nodding along to conversations, but not engaging too much. When Nathan placed his hand on her knee approvingly, she felt relief wash over her. She was learning. Gaslighting isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with accusations and yelling. Sometimes it's the quiet erosion of your own confidence, the slow rewriting of your memories, the gradual conviction that maybe you are the problem. And Eleanor? She was starting to believe it. Eleanor had never been the kind of woman to second-guess herself. She had always spoken her mind, laughed freely, and moved through life with confidence. But lately, she found herself hesitating before she spoke, carefully choosing every word, gauging every reaction. She was walking on eggshells, constantly anticipating Nathan's moods, adjusting her behavior to keep the peace. It started with little things. If Nathan came home from work in a bad mood, Eleanor instinctively quieted her movements, softening her voice as if even the sound of her presence could set him off. She stopped talking about her day unless he asked, afraid that mentioning something trivial might annoy him. "You never tell me anything anymore," Nathan remarked one evening, his tone almost accusatory. Eleanor's stomach twisted. "I just don't want to overwhelm you when you've had a long day." Nathan sighed, shaking his head. "So now I'm some monster that you have to tiptoe around? That's not fair, Eleanor. I just want to feel connected to you." She felt guilt flood her chest. "I didn't mean it like that. I don't want to say the wrong thing." Nathan ran a hand through his hair and gave her a tired smile. "I don't want you to feel like that either. Just be yourself, okay?" But that was the problem. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. The more she tried to keep him happy, the harder it became to predict what would upset him. Some days he would pull her into his arms, whispering about how much he adored her. Other days he would barely acknowledge her, his words sharp and distant. The worst were the nights when he would retreat into silence. She would sit beside him, feeling the tension in the air, her heart pounding as she searched for something, anything, to say that wouldn't make things worse. "Is something wrong?" she would ask cautiously. Nathan would sigh. "Nothing. I'm just tired." But it was never just fatigue. His silence was a weapon, a punishment that left Eleanor restless and anxious. trying to solve a puzzle she didn't even understand. She would replay their conversations over and over again, searching for what she had said or done to cause the shift in his mood. "I just want to make things right," she admitted one evening, desperate to bridge the gap between them. Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Then stop overanalyzing everything. Just let things be." But how could she, when she felt like every breath she took had to be calculated? She stopped seeing friends, stopped reaching out to family as often. Not because Nathan explicitly told her not to, but because it was easier this way. The less she did outside of their relationship, the fewer opportunities there were for him to feel neglected, to question her loyalty. One evening, her phone buzzed with a message from Riley. She hadn't spoken to her in weeks. "Riley, Elle, I'm worried about you. Can we talk?" Eleanor stared at the screen, her heart aching. She wanted to reply, but the moment she reached for her phone, Nathan glanced over. "Who's that?" he asked casually, but there was something beneath his tone. Something expectant. Eleanor hesitated. "Just Riley." Nathan scoffed. "Still trying to turn you against me?" "She's not. I don't know why she thinks she knows what's best for you," Nathan muttered. "You're happy, aren't you?" The question felt like a trap. Eleanor swallowed hard, nodding. "Of course I am." Nathan's expression softened. He leaned over, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That's all that matters." Later that night, she deleted Riley's message without responding. Eleanor learned to read the signs, to anticipate the storms before they came. She watched the way Nathan's jaw tensed when something annoyed him. She memorized the way his fingers tapped against his knee when he was losing patience. She learned that disagreeing with him, even over something small, could shift the mood in an instant. So she stopped disagreeing. She stopped having opinions of her own. She told herself it was easier this way, that it wasn't that bad, that as long as she kept Nathan happy, things would be okay. She didn't realize she had become a ghost in her own life. Eleanor had spent so much time trying to keep Nathan happy that she no longer knew what happiness felt like for herself. Every day was a balancing act, a careful dance to avoid setting him off. She told herself it was love, that this was what real commitment looked like. But deep down, something was shifting. The weight of everything she had given up, the friendships, the independence, the confidence, was becoming unbearable. It happened one night at a dinner party Nathan had insisted they attend. It was an elegant affair, the kind of evening Eleanor used to love. She had dressed carefully, wearing a soft blue dress Nathan had once complimented. She had kept her makeup light, her jewelry minimal. She had done everything right, or so she thought. The evening started fine. Eleanor stayed close to Nathan, smiling when appropriate, keeping her laughter soft and delicate, just the way he liked it. But then she made a mistake. She let herself enjoy a conversation. A man named Daniel, one of Nathan's colleagues, had started talking to her about literature. One of her old passions, something she had nearly forgotten about in her effort to mold herself into the woman Nathan wanted. She became engrossed in the discussion, her eyes lighting up for the first time in months, as she debated the themes of a book she had loved years ago. She didn't notice the way Nathan's expression darkened. She didn't realize he had stopped engaging in his own conversation, his focus entirely on her. Until the drive home, the silence was suffocating. Eleanor's stomach churned as she stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in the way Nathan gripped the steering wheel, in the way his jaw was locked tight. "Did you have fun tonight?" Nathan finally asked, his voice deceptively calm. Eleanor hesitated. "Yeah, it was nice." Nathan let out a sharp breath. "You certainly seemed to enjoy yourself." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" His fingers drummed against the wheel. "You really didn't notice? You were practically throwing yourself at Daniel, laughing, leaning in, hanging on his every word. It was embarrassing." Her breath caught. "Nathan, that's not fair. We were just talking about books. It wasn't anything." "Don't," he interrupted, his tone cold. "Don't try to make me feel like I'm crazy. I know what I saw." Eleanor felt her heart hammering in her chest. "I wasn't flirting. I was just..." "Enough!" Nathan's voice snapped through the car like a whip. "You always do this, Eleanor. You act like you don't know what you're doing, like you don't realize how you make me look." Tears burned in her eyes. "I didn't mean..." "You never mean to," Nathan muttered. "But somehow it always happens." They drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was tired, small, a shadow of the person she used to be. She thought of Riley, of all the times her friend had warned her. She thought of her mother's worried voice on the phone, of the countless invitations she had declined, of the dreams she had abandoned. And suddenly she saw it. She had lost herself. And for what? For a man who made her feel like she was walking through life on a tightrope, waiting for the moment she would fall. Her hands clenched into fists. The realization was cold, sharp, and undeniable. She couldn't do this anymore. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a life without Nathan. And for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not yet. But it was there, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around herself. The realization that she couldn't live like this forever had taken root, and now it was growing. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to ask, "What if I left?" The thought was terrifying, yet intoxicating. It clung to her, whispering in the back of her mind as she moved through her daily routine, as she smiled through Nathan's moods, as she adjusted herself to fit whatever version of her he wanted in that moment. She started noticing things differently. The way she flinched when Nathan's voice sharpened, even when he wasn't yelling. The way her shoulders tensed when she heard his footsteps approaching. The way she forced herself to laugh at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. Had she always been like this? Had she always been so small? One evening, she stood in the kitchen washing dishes while Nathan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. She glanced over at him, her heart pounding, and asked herself, if I left, would he even care? The answer came too quickly. No. The first thing she did was check her finances. Nathan handled most of their shared expenses, but Eleanor still had her own bank account. She hadn't touched it much since moving in with him. He always insisted that he wanted to take care of things, that she didn't need to worry about money. But when she logged into her online banking, she felt her stomach sink. There was barely anything left. She had let him convince her to cut back at work, to take fewer hours, to relax more. And now, she had nothing to fall back on. Her fingers trembled as she clicked through the transactions. He had never explicitly stopped her from having money, but she could see the pattern now. Every time she had been about to make a big purchase for herself, Nathan had given her a reason not to. You don't need a new laptop, babe. Yours still works fine. That gym membership is kind of expensive, don't you think? We can work out at home. Why are you spending so much on books? You barely have time to read anymore. It hadn't felt like control at the time, but looking at the numbers, she saw it clearly. He had slowly stripped her of her independence, and she had let him. She closed her laptop, her heart racing. If she wanted to leave, she needed a plan. She started making small changes. She didn't want to alert Nathan, so she moved carefully, quietly. She began picking up extra shifts at work, telling him they had asked her to help out. He didn't like it, but she played the role well, acting as though she felt guilty about being away from him so much. I miss you, she would murmur into his chest at night, and he would stroke her hair, assuring her it was okay. She had never been good at lying, but desperation made her convincing. She also started setting money aside, small amounts, nothing noticeable. She took cash back when buying groceries and stashed it in an old book on the shelf. She began packing little things he wouldn't miss. A few sentimental items, some clothes she could layer, her most important documents. And she reached out to Riley. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen for a long time before she finally typed out a message. Eleanor, I know it's been a while, but I need to talk to you. Please don't ask questions yet. Can we meet? The reply came faster than she expected. Riley, of course. Just tell me when and where. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. Riley hadn't given up on her. Maybe there was still hope. Meeting Riley was the first time in months that Eleanor had been somewhere without Nathan knowing exactly where she was. She felt paranoid, glancing over her shoulder as she walked into the quiet cafe, her heart hammering. When Riley saw her, she stood immediately, wrapping her arms around Eleanor in a tight hug. You don't have to say anything yet, Riley whispered. Just breathe. Eleanor inhaled shakily, holding on to her friend like she was a lifeline. And for the first time in years, she finally let herself cry. I need to leave, Eleanor admitted once she had composed herself. She gripped her coffee cup tightly, as if it could ground her. But I don't know how. Riley didn't hesitate. You won't do it alone. Whatever you need, I'm here. Eleanor blinked, startled by the certainty in her voice. You're not going to tell me I'm overreacting? that I should try to make it work. Riley's expression hardened. Eleanor, I've been waiting for you to say this for 2 years. I didn't push you because I knew you weren't ready. But I see you. I see what he's done to you. And I will help you get out. The words sent a shudder through Eleanor's body. Relief. Fear. Hope. She wasn't alone. That night, when she returned home, Nathan was already there. He was seated on the couch, his phone in hand, his expression unreadable. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Where were you? He asked casually, though there was an edge to his voice. Eleanor forced a smile. Just out. Work was stressful, and I needed some air. Nathan studied her for a long moment before nodding. You should have told me. I was worried. Were you? She thought bitterly. Or were you just wondering how much of your control over me is slipping? She sat beside him, letting him wrap an arm around her. He kissed the top of her head, sighing. You know I love you, right? Eleanor closed her eyes. I know. And for the first time, she realized that love wasn't enough. She had made her decision. She was leaving. Eleanor had made her decision, but making a decision and acting on it were two very different things. Leaving wasn't as simple as walking out the door. It required precision, planning, and patience. If she made the wrong move, if she gave Nathan any reason to suspect what she was doing, he would tighten his grip. She had seen it before. The way his demeanor changed when he felt her slipping away. The subtle manipulation, the guilt trips, the perfectly crafted arguments that always made her doubt herself. If he sensed what she was planning, he would find a way to convince her that leaving was a mistake. He would make her feel like she needed him. So Eleanor played her part. She smiled at the right moments. She let him pull her into his arms when he wanted affection. She nodded when he spoke, laughed at his jokes, pretended everything was fine. But beneath the surface, she was fighting a silent battle. The days stretched on, and Eleanor worked tirelessly to prepare. She continued her secret savings, slipping small amounts of cash into her escape fund whenever she could. She packed her essentials carefully, keeping them hidden in a place Nathan would never think to check. She practiced lying. She told Nathan she had to work late more often, giving her excuses to meet with Riley, to make sure she had a place to go. She told him she was just tired when he questioned why she seemed distant. She let him believe she was still the same woman he had molded her into. But inside, she was preparing for war. One evening, Nathan surprised her with dinner reservations. Just us, he said, squeezing her hand. We've been so busy lately. I miss you. Eleanor's stomach twisted. He knows something is off. She forced a smile. That sounds perfect. The restaurant was dimly lit, romantic. Nathan ordered for her, as he always did, choosing the meal he thought she should have. She no longer fought him on it. It was easier to let him believe he was in control. Halfway through dinner, he reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb stroked her skin in slow, deliberate circles. I feel like we've been out of sync lately, he said, his voice soft. Are you happy, Eleanor? The question made her stomach clench. It wasn't a real question. It was a test. She looked at him, forcing every ounce of her fear down. Of course I am. Nathan studied her face, his eyes sharp, calculating. Good, because I don't know what I'd do without you. His grip on her hand tightened just slightly, just enough to send a warning. Eleanor swallowed hard. I love you, Nathan. The words tasted like poison. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Nathan slept soundly beside her. His arm was draped over her waist, his presence heavy and suffocating. Her mind raced. She needed to leave soon. She couldn't keep up this act much longer. Every day that passed was another risk, another opportunity for him to figure out what she was doing. She turned her head slightly, looking at his sleeping face. He looked peaceful, almost innocent. But she knew better. Eleanor exhaled slowly, then closed her eyes. Soon. Very soon. She just had to make sure she got out before he saw through the act. Because if he did, she wasn't sure she'd get another chance. Eleanor had set a date. A quiet, unremarkable Tuesday, a day that wouldn't raise suspicion. It was only a few days away now, and every hour that passed made her more anxious. Every glance Nathan gave her, every unexpected question, every moment he studied her face, she wondered if he knew. She spent those last few days making final preparations. She checked her hidden cash, counted and recounted it until she knew the exact amount by heart. She finalized her plan with Riley, making sure there was a place waiting for her. She packed her bag carefully, keeping it hidden behind old clothes she knew Nathan would never go through. And most of all, she rehearsed. She planned how she would leave, what she would say if he questioned her absence. She calculated the time it would take for her to walk to the car Riley had promised to park 2 blocks away. She pictured herself walking out the door for the last time, feeling the weight of years of manipulation fall from her shoulders. She just had to make it through the next few days. Nathan, of course, had no idea, but his behavior was shifting, as if some part of him sensed something was changing. He had been more affectionate lately, his tone softer, his words dripping with nostalgia. "Remember when we first met?" he murmured one evening, pulling her into his lap. "You were so independent, so stubborn. I never thought I'd tame you." Eleanor forced a laugh, though the words made her sick. Tame her, as if she had been a wild thing that needed to be controlled. "You've made me a better person," she whispered, her voice steady despite the bile rising in her throat. Nathan kissed her temple. "I just want to take care of you, Eleanor. No one else will love you like I do." She held her breath, staying perfectly still in his arms, knowing it would be one of the last times she would ever have to endure his touch. The night before she was supposed to leave, Eleanor barely slept. Every sound in the apartment felt amplified. Every creak of the floorboards made her pulse spike. Her bag was packed. Her plan was in place. All she had to do was survive until morning. The next day, Nathan was unusually quiet. He watched her closely, his sharp gaze scanning her face, her movements. She kept her breathing even, her expressions neutral. She made breakfast as usual, sat beside him as usual, played her role to perfection. But she could feel it. Something was wrong. She reached for her phone, planning to send Riley a quick message. Before she could unlock the screen, Nathan's hand covered hers. "Who are you texting?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, something dangerous. Eleanor's heart pounded. "Just work." Nathan didn't let go. His eyes bore into hers, searching. "You've been acting strange lately." She swallowed hard. "I'm just tired. Work has been exhausting." A slow nod. "You sure that's all?" She forced herself to hold his gaze. "Of course." After a long, agonizing pause, Nathan let go of her hand and leaned back. "All right, just don't keep secrets from me. You know I hate that." She smiled, nodded, played the role. And then she continued with her day, knowing that soon, very soon, this nightmare would be over. Eleanor's nerves were razor-sharp. Every minute felt like an eternity. Every glance from Nathan a silent interrogation. She had never been this close to freedom before, and that made everything feel more dangerous. If she slipped up now, there would be no second chances. Her bag was packed, tucked safely behind layers of old clothes in the back of her closet. Riley's car was parked 2 blocks away, waiting for the moment she could slip out unnoticed. Every detail had been planned to perfection, but still the fear gnawed at her. Would she really get out? Would she finally be free? Nathan left for work at his usual time. Eleanor had memorized every detail of his morning routine. How long he took in the shower, the way he checked his phone before putting on his shoes, the precise moment he would walk out the door. Today was no different. She stood in the kitchen, sipping her coffee as he grabbed his keys. "I'll be home late tonight," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Don't wait up." She smiled, masking the tremor in her hands. "Okay." As soon as the door shut behind him, she counted to 10. Then 20. Then 30. She needed to be sure. Finally, she exhaled, set her coffee down, and sprinted to her room. Her hands shook as she grabbed the bag. She had rehearsed this moment over and over, but reality was different. This was real. The weight of everything hit her all at once. She wasn't just leaving a man, she was leaving years of control, of conditioning, of manipulation. She was leaving behind the version of herself that had been molded for him. And she was terrified. She forced herself to move. One step, then another. She slung the bag over her shoulder, grabbed her phone, and walked to the front door. Then she hesitated. Her heart pounded as she turned back. The apartment was silent, still, filled with ghosts of the life she had lived here. The memories of nights spent crying alone, of words that cut deeper than any blade, of the way she had slowly disappeared into nothingness. She shook herself. No more. And with that, she turned the doorknob and stepped out. The air outside was cold, but it filled her lungs like the first breath of life. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, keeping her head down as she moved quickly down the sidewalk. Every sound made her jump. Footsteps behind her, the honk of a car, a door creaking open. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. "Riley, I'm here." She picked up her pace, turning the corner. Riley's car was waiting just where she said it would be. The sight of it nearly broke her. She was really doing this. Riley got out of the car the moment she saw her, rushing forward. "Eleanor." "I don't have time," Eleanor whispered urgently. "We have to go. Now." Without another word, she climbed into the passenger seat, her bag pressed tightly against her lap. Riley jumped in and started the engine. The car pulled away from the curb, the city blurring past them. Eleanor dared to glance back, her apartment building growing smaller in the distance. She turned away, staring straight ahead. She wasn't looking back anymore. For the first time in years, she was free. The car ride was silent at first. Eleanor gripped the strap of her bag, her knuckles white as Riley drove through the city streets. Every turn, every stoplight, every passing car sent waves of anxiety crashing through her. Was he following her? Had he realized she was gone yet? Was he already planning his next move? "You're safe now," Riley said gently, glancing over at her. "Breathe, Elle. He can't touch you anymore." Eleanor exhaled slowly, but the tightness in her chest remained. She wasn't sure she would ever feel safe again. They didn't go to Riley's apartment. That would be too obvious. Instead, Riley had arranged for them to stay at her cousin's cabin, a secluded place an hour outside the city, somewhere Nathan wouldn't think to look. Eleanor stared out the window as the buildings faded into open roads and stretches of trees. The farther they got from the city, the more the weight on her shoulders shifted. She had dreamed of this moment, of getting away, of breathing air that wasn't tainted by fear. But now that she was here, it didn't feel like she had imagined it would. She felt lost. "Talk to me," Riley said, her voice soft but firm. "What's going through your head?" Eleanor swallowed, gripping her hands together. "I don't know who I am without him." Riley's fingers tightened on the wheel. "That's not true. You were you before him, and you'll find yourself again. But what if I can't?" Eleanor's voice cracked. What if he was right? What if no one else will love me? What if I never feel whole again?" Riley pulled the car over to the side of the road abruptly, shifting into park before turning to Eleanor. "Listen to me," she said fiercely. "He made you believe those things because it kept you under his control. But you are strong. You got out. You left. That takes more strength than most people will ever know." Eleanor looked at her friend, tears filling her eyes. She wanted to believe her. She wanted to hold on to those words like a lifeline. "It's going to take time," Riley continued. "But you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll remind you every single day if I have to." Eleanor let out a shaky breath, nodding. "Okay." Riley reached over and squeezed her hand. "Okay, now let's get you somewhere safe." The cabin was small but cozy. A stone fireplace sat in the center of the living room, the wooden walls giving it a warm, secluded feel. Riley's cousin had left food in the fridge, fresh sheets on the bed, and a note that simply read, "You're safe here." Eleanor stood in the doorway, staring at the unfamiliar space. It was strange, standing in a place where Nathan had never been. A place where he had no control. She was free, truly free, but the fear was still there, clawing at the edges of her mind. The habits Nathan had drilled into her. The constant need to explain where she was, the anxiety over doing something he wouldn't approve of, the worry that she had made a mistake. None of it had disappeared just because she had left. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. One step at a time, Riley walked up beside her. "Take a shower, get some rest. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you." Riley gave her a soft smile. "You don't have to thank me. You just have to promise me one thing." Eleanor looked at her. "What?" "Promise me that you won't go back. No matter how hard it gets. No matter how much he tries to pull you back in." A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. The idea of going back was terrifying, and yet, some twisted part of her understood why people did. The familiarity. The guilt. The fear of being alone. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. She met Riley's gaze and nodded. "I promise." And for the first time, she meant it. The first morning Eleanor woke up in the cabin, it felt like she had stepped into a different world. The silence was different here. Not the suffocating silence of walking on eggshells, not the heavy quiet of an argument waiting to happen. This was freedom. But freedom didn't feel the way she had imagined. She thought leaving Nathan would bring instant relief, that the moment she escaped, the weight of years of control would lift from her shoulders. Instead, she felt raw, fragile, unsteady on her feet, like a newborn deer trying to walk for the first time. She made coffee, staring out at the frost-covered trees. She should have felt safe. Nathan was miles away, unaware of where she had gone. And yet, she flinched at every unexpected sound. The snap of a branch outside made her stomach clench. The vibration of her phone sent her pulse racing. She kept expecting him to be there, to walk through the door, to find her. Her body was free, but her mind was still in the cage he had built for her. Riley arrived later that afternoon, carrying a bag of groceries. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Eleanor let out a breathy laugh. "In a way, I have." Riley set the bag down and pulled her into a hug. "This is going to take time. You spent years being conditioned to revolve around him. It's not something you just switch off overnight." Eleanor swallowed. "I keep hearing his voice in my head. Every time I do something, I wonder if he'd approve, if he'd get angry. Even now, when I know he's not here, I still feel like I have to justify myself." Riley squeezed her hand. "That's because he didn't just control your actions. He controlled the way you think. But that's not who you are, Elle. You're more than the version of you he created." Eleanor wanted to believe her. The first step to reclaiming herself was the hardest. She needed to do something that Nathan wouldn't have approved of. Something just for her. That night, she picked up a book from Riley's collection. It was a novel she had once loved, years before Nathan had dismissed it as pointless, and convinced her to stop reading fiction altogether. She curled up by the fireplace, running her fingers over the worn pages. And then, hesitantly, she began to read. At first, the words felt foreign. She struggled to concentrate, her thoughts drifting. But the more she read, the more the fog in her mind lifted. Page after page, she felt something stir deep inside her. A small ember of who she used to be, reigniting. For the first time in years, she lost herself in a story. Not because someone allowed her to. Not because she needed permission. But because she chose to. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something profound. Nathan had taken so much from her. But he hadn't destroyed her. She was still here. And she was taking herself back. Eleanor had expected freedom to be a clean break, a door slamming shut with no lingering traces of the past. But that wasn't how trauma worked. Nathan was gone from her life, but not from her mind. The days passed in a haze of cautious steps and second-guessing. She still hesitated before speaking, catching herself checking her tone, her words, as if Nathan were still listening. When she made coffee, she made it the way he liked it, black, 2 sugars, before forcing herself to pour it down the sink and start again, this time the way she wanted it. She had spent so long shaping her life around Nathan's wants that she no longer knew what she wanted. Riley noticed. "You're still acting like he's watching you," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, the stars stretching endlessly above them. "You don't owe him anything now. Not your thoughts, not your fears. He's not here. He never will be again." Eleanor swallowed. "I know, but my body doesn't." Riley exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "That's what happens when someone makes you believe that their love is survival. You learn to make yourself smaller just to fit into the space they allow you." Eleanor stared into the darkness, her fingers gripping the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I don't know how to be big again." Riley reached over and took her hand. "Then we'll figure it out together." The first test came the next morning. Eleanor woke up with an unfamiliar feeling, an urge to do something reckless, something that Nathan would have hated. She drove into town alone. Nathan had never liked her driving long distances without him. "It's not safe," he would say. "I just worry about you, babe. Let me handle it." She had let him. For years, she had let him convince her that she was incapable of managing the simplest things on her own. But today she got in the car, turned the key, and drove. The first few miles were nerve-wracking, her hands tight on the wheel. She expected a text, a call, something that would pull her back into his grip. But there was nothing. For the first time in years, Eleanor realized she could go wherever she wanted. She didn't have to ask permission. She didn't have to check in. She was free. When she returned to the cabin, she found Riley sitting outside, waiting for her. "How was it?" Eleanor parked the car and stepped out. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, adrenaline still rushing through her veins. But beneath it, there was something else. Something that almost felt like exhilaration. "I did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "I went into town. Alone." Riley grinned. "And?" Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "And nothing happened." Riley laughed. "That's because you're not his prisoner anymore, Elle. You never were." Eleanor nodded slowly. She wasn't sure she fully believed it yet, but for the first time she wanted to. That night, Eleanor stepped outside alone. The night air was crisp, wrapping around her as she stared up at the vast sky. She had spent so long feeling small, feeling trapped, feeling like she had no way out. But here she was, breathing, existing, learning. A part of her still waited for the other shoe to drop, for Nathan to appear, to pull her back into his orbit. But with each passing moment, the fear faded just a little more. She wasn't whole yet, but for the first time she believed she could be. The morning felt different, lighter. For the first time in years, Eleanor woke up without the crushing weight of expectation. There was no need to perform, no fear of misstepping, no silent punishment waiting for her if she got something wrong. She stretched beneath the blankets, feeling the warmth of the sun as it filtered through the curtains. It was a new day, a day without Nathan, and that alone made it extraordinary. Riley had made breakfast, the smell of fresh coffee and scrambled eggs filling the small cabin. As Eleanor stepped into the kitchen, Riley grinned over her mug. "You look well rested." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "I think I am." Riley set down her coffee and gestured for Eleanor to sit. "I've been thinking," she began. "You don't just need a break from Nathan. You need a break from everything that reminds you of him. Maybe you should start fresh somewhere new. A place where he has no history, no control." Eleanor exhaled. "I've thought about it, but where would I even go?" "Anywhere you want." Riley shrugged. "That's the point." The words struck something deep inside her. Anywhere she wanted. For so long, her world had been dictated by Nathan's choices, his needs. The idea of making her own decisions, of choosing a future that had nothing to do with him, felt overwhelming. But wasn't that what freedom meant? Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat outside, a notebook in her lap. She hadn't written anything in years. Nathan had always dismissed it as a waste of time, telling her she had more important things to focus on. But now, with the world open before her, she felt an urge she hadn't in a long time. The desire to create something for herself. She pressed the pen to the paper and wrote the first words that came to mind. "Who am I now?" It was a question without an immediate answer, but that was okay. For the first time, she didn't need to have everything figured out. She could take her time. She could discover herself again, piece by piece. That evening, Riley found her sitting on the porch, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts." Eleanor glanced at her friend, then back at the horizon. "I think I want to leave." Riley's expression remained steady. "Where to?" "I don't know yet," Eleanor admitted. "But I want to start over. Somewhere new. Somewhere that's mine." Riley smiled. "Then let's figure it out. Together." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't alone. She wasn't broken. She wasn't the girl Nathan had tried to shape into something small and quiet. She was Eleanor, and she was finally free.